This Lenten season, we are focusing on the Gospel of John, and we're looking at that as the Gospel of light and life. And as we began Lent, I invited all of you to join me in reading the Gospel of John. And so I hope that you have been doing that reading. If you haven't, there are bookmarks on the back that have the daily reading plan for the 40 days of Lent. And so you can join us. If you have been keeping up, you should be through chapter 5 of John's Gospel. And so it's a great time to catch up if you're not there, because 5 chapters is not that tough to get through. But it's great reading his gospel. And this morning, I'm going to help us look at one of the miracles that Jesus performs and use it to show us how to read John's gospel and to get the message that he's trying to share with us. John is definitely trying to tell us about what happened 2,000 years ago, give us the information of how Jesus lived his life as he walked on the earth. But he's also trying to call us to look a little deeper and to see the meaning behind that, the meaning that is underneath those stories of how Jesus lived his life. And so in the small group material, Adam Hamilton, who's on the video for the small groups, talks about comparing John's writing to that of a painter. That an artist, as they paint a picture, they don't just want you to see the picture, they want you to kind of dig a little deeper and to find the meaning behind that picture. And the picture that Adam Hamilton actually uses is Vincent van Gogh's A Starry Night. And you probably all have seen this picture before, The Starry Night. And probably have heard of Vincent van Gogh, probably most famously known for cutting off part of his ear. There's lots of different stories of how he cut off part of his ear. Mainly it's because he had some mental illness issues, and so different things led him to do that. But also an interesting thing I learned just recently about Vincent van Gogh is that he wanted to become a pastor. And he actually worked underneath a Methodist pastor in England for a little while, kind of learning what that was all about. And then he was trying to go off to seminary to be trained as a pastor, but he didn't pass the entrance exam. He couldn't pass that. And so he decided just to become a missionary. And he began to go on some missionary trips and do God's work. But because of his mental health issues, he had some difficulty relating to people. And eventually the church asked him to stop doing that, to stop going off as a missionary because it wasn't going very well for him. Which to him, he still loved God very much, but that kind of gave him some harsh feelings towards the church because of how that all happened in his life. But so then we have this painting, I think his most famous painting probably, but I'm not much of an art critic, so I don't know a lot about it. But I've always been drawn to the light of this picture. The light in the moon and in the stars always catches my attention as I look at it. But then also, if you look a little closer at the bottom, there is a town that's down there. And there's some light coming from the town as well. As you zoom in, you can kind of see, can you see the homes that have light on in their houses? But also there's a church. Do you see the church in there? Anything you notice about the church? It's dark. Yeah, there's no light on in the church. And so to me, as an artist, they want you to ask questions. They want you to dig in a little bit. My question is, why is it dark at the church? And maybe Van Gogh was just painting this, and it's nighttime, and it's not church night. Maybe everyone's at home and no one's there, so they didn't leave any lights on at the church. Maybe that's the only reason that there's no light on there. But I also wondered, maybe it reflects a little bit of his harsh feelings towards the church that he had. And maybe he feels like the church is a place where there isn't light shining. I think that's possible. We don't really know. He never told us what it symbolized, but that's what art does, isn't it? It causes us to dig a little deeper, to zoom in a little closer, and to ask some questions, and then seek that meaning that is there. And that's the same thing we want to do with John's Gospel. As we read John's Gospel, there is the surface story, the picture that is right there for you to see. But then if we take some time to zoom in and look at, especially at the details that John puts into the stories, those details might lead us to ask some questions, to dig a little deeper, and to find the meaning that he's trying to share with us. And that's what I want us to do this morning. We're going to look at the second chapter of John's Gospel, and this is the first miracle that Jesus performs. And so I want to read it, and we'll look at the story, and the main story that's there, but then we'll also look a little deeper and see what the meaning might be underneath it. John chapter 2, starting at verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. This is the word of God for us this morning. So first I want us to look at the surface story, just the main story that is right there in front of us. And it's a story about a wedding, right? A wedding celebration at Cana in Galilee. Jesus is there, his disciples are there, his mother is there, and they're enjoying the celebration until they run out of wine, which would have been a major embarrassment for the family having that celebration. And weddings back in those times, they would sometimes last a week. It was a big celebration. And so at some point they run out of wine. And Mary brings that fact to Jesus and lets him know that they are out of wine. And Jesus' response to her is "Dear woman, why are you involving me?" His response is kind of, "I don't want to be involved in this. I don't want to be a part of this." And one interesting thing as I was reading this, the real translation is "woman, please don't involve me." And he just calls her woman, which to us is very harsh, isn't it? For a son to call his mother woman, we wouldn't really want to do that. But back in those times, that was common. That was actually a term of endearment, and that's why my NIV translation says "dear woman," trying to tell us it wasn't a harsh thing Jesus was doing. He was being soft with his mother, He's saying, "Dear woman, I really don't, this isn't my time. I don't want to be involved in this," was his response. So what did Jesus say to her? I don't want to help. I don't want to be a part of this. And what did Mary do to that? She ignored it, didn't she? She said to the servants, "He really does want to help. So just do whatever he tells you to do." And I just love that mother-son moment there. Has your mom ever just answered for you when you said no and she says yes? Did your mom do that? My wife likes to do that for me, don't you, dear? You know, James would love watching your kids. He'd love to volunteer. He'd love cleaning your yard. He'll be right over and do that. He'd love to donate a kidney. He'll be right there and give you that. She volunteers me for all kinds of things without checking with me. But that's what Jesus' mom is doing here. Jesus says, "No, I'd rather not." And she said, "Yes, you will." And it says, just do whatever he tells you to do. And what does Jesus say to that? "Okay, Mom, I'll do it. Just get these jars." And he tells the servants, "Get these jars, fill them with water." And they fill them all up. He says, "Take some of that and give it to the master of the banquet." And so the master of the banquet gets this water that now has become wine. And as he tastes it, he has to get the groom and compliment him. He says most people, they use the good stuff first, and then they bring out the cheap stuff later after people have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. And he compliments the groom with doing this and hosting the party in that way. And then John finishes this passage by saying this is the first miraculous sign. It wasn't the first miracle. He said this is a miraculous sign. And all through John's gospel, when there's a miracle that takes place, it's not just a miracle, it's a sign. It's pointing to something. It's showing something. And he says this is the first sign that you will get. And actually in John's gospel, there'll be 7 more signs, 7 more miracles that he will share in the gospels. And they'll be healing people. They'll be feeding the 5,000, walking on water. And the last one is in John 11, where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And John is telling us already, he says, these aren't just stories. These aren't just things that happen. They're true, but they're a sign. They point to something deeper. And he even tells us in this one, the last verse there that I read, he says this was so Jesus could reveal his glory. So Jesus could show who he was. That as the Son of God, he had power over things that people didn't have power over. Because he was God in the flesh. And the reason that he wants to have this sign, it also told us, so his disciples put their faith in him. It's so that we could believe. So that those who saw those miracles could believe and grow in their faith in Jesus Christ. And so that's the story that John tells to us, and that's a great story just in itself. But then if we look back and if we zoom in, there's all kinds of little details that we could dig into a little bit that John, I think, is trying to tell us. There's a deeper story also going on. There's much more meaning here than just this miracle of water turning into wine. And one thing I looked at is the jars. Did you notice what the jars were used for that he told us? It said they were used for ceremonial washing. Which was very common for the Jews, that they would do these washings, and if you didn't do the washing right, you weren't really clean. Well, Jesus later teaches, he says, well, Are you clean because of what you do on the outside or because of what you do on the inside? And so I wonder if John might be calling us to that teaching and to think a little bit more about what does it really mean to be clean as Jesus works in our lives. There's also, just for me, kind of thinking, what about water and wine? Do we still use water and wine to point to something significant? Maybe water and grape juice in our church services? Maybe there's some significance there that we might dig into a little bit. There's lots of little things in here that John's trying to call us to dig a little deeper, get a little closer to. And really what caught my attention were the last three words that the master of the banquet said. He said, best till now. The best till now. And I began to wonder if John was trying to tell us and remind us that Jesus saves the best till now. That he takes the ordinary, something as ordinary as water, and turns it into the best wine that they've had at this celebration. Is he trying to tell us that Jesus takes the ordinary times in our lives and makes them into moments that are the best moments of our lives? I believe that's part of what he's trying to tell us, that the ordinary with Jesus becomes the extraordinary. That Jesus has this power to change those things in our lives from just an ordinary moment to this wonderful, the best till now moment of my life because of God's presence. That's just the power that Jesus has when his glory is there in the midst of the moments that we have in our life. One of my favorite best moments of each and every year is Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is such a wonderful day, and we have 3 services here usually, so I get to talk with 100 people, and and I'm talking with them, and then my best part is when we're done with those. It's when the last service is done, and I get to go home, get out of my suit, and then just sit and be with my kids and with my wife. And hopefully the snow is falling outside. It's that is the best moment to me. An ordinary moment, but yet an extraordinary moment. Just feeling the peace and the joy that Christmas brings. Is one of my favorite times of the year. It's Jesus bringing the best into our lives. And I believe that he wants to do that in each and every one of our lives. That each and every day, if we would look, he will take the ordinary and make it extraordinary and give us those best moments each and every week. I like to tease my wife because I'm not one that always looks for the best in things necessarily, that is the best ever, but Helen always has the best ever, everything. If you've gone on a mission trip with her, anyone gone on a mission trip with Helen? Has she ever said, this is the best mission trip ever? Every single time she says that. Every single time it's the best trip ever. Every summer games, it's the best summer games ever. And I was asking Sonia, at least probably twice a month, I would say on Monday, we hear from Helen, yesterday was the best worship ever. The best that we've had. At least twice a month we hear that, if not every week, it seems like. But she always, everything is just the best. And it's because I think you can't always be the best, but she just believes that when God shows up, it is the best. And it keeps on happening if we keep our eyes open. God keeps showing up, and he takes those ordinary, everyday, even weekly events and turns them into the best moments of our life. Because that's the power and the glory of God, is he changes things to become better, to be the best until now. And so I want to encourage you this morning, if you feel like things are going pretty well in your life, just wait, because the best is still to come. God still has the best in store for you, and it will be coming. So you just have the best till now, because more of that best is coming as God continues to work in your life and to be present in the things that you do. Maybe your life's not going so well. Maybe you're going through a tough time, and maybe things are difficult. I want you to know, too, that if you keep your eyes on Jesus, the best is still to come. That God will bring the best even out of those tough and difficult times that you face, because that's what he does. When he comes into our situations, he makes it the best out of anything that we're going through. And so lean on him, keep your eyes on him. And really, actually, I think Mary in this passage tells us how to have the best life that we can have. She gives us the key to doing that. What did she tell the servants to do? She said, do whatever he tells you to do. Do whatever he says. And that's how we have the best in this life. I've been a Christian for about 25 years. This summer will be 25 years ago that I was at Summer Games and gave my life to Christ. The one thing that I just deeply know as I go about living my life is that when I do what Jesus calls me to do, it works out to be the best. When I do what James thinks is a better idea, it doesn't work out so well. Because sometimes I think that I have a shortcut. I think that I have an easier way to do it. I think that I might be a little bit smarter than him, and that doesn't ever work out for me. What works out the best is when I listen to what Jesus has called me to do. And as you read through the Gospel of John, I want you to listen to what is it that Jesus calls us to do. He calls us to love God above all other things. He calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves. He calls us to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to give drink to those who are thirsty. He calls us to even love our enemies, to pray for those who persecute us, those who hurt us. He calls us to forgive those that do something against us. And when we do the things that he calls us to do, it works out to the best. It always does. And it just seems to do it. It's not magic. It's not easy, definitely. But it works out when we listen to what he says for us to do and we live our lives after the example that he has given us. It always leads to the best. And so I want us to, as we read through John's gospel, to notice the message of what happens, but then also the deeper meaning and how he calls us to live out the life and the light that he calls for us to have. That's one thing with that painting of the light being out in the church. I don't ever want to be a part of a dark church. Do you? I want to be a part of a church where the light is always on. And I believe the light will always be on if we are listening to God, if we're listening to Jesus and who he is calling us to be and how he calls us to be the light of the world and to share that light with other people. Then the light will always be on. And so it's up to each and every one of us to have our light shining, to live the best life that Jesus has called us to by listening to what he says and then doing it in our lives. Doing it even when it doesn't make sense. You know, because that loving your enemy thing just doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't sound like it's supposed to work. But when you run out of wine, it doesn't make sense to just fill up some jars with water either, does it? But Jesus uses that to bring out the best. And so even when it doesn't make sense what he's calling us to do, if you will do it and follow through with it, he will bring the best from it. He will take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. So continue to lean on the words that Jesus says as he teaches us. Listen to it. And then do whatever he says, because that will bring out the best in your life, and it will allow your light to shine in this world. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you that